And now, Gimmick Infringement.
Welcome, everybody, to the Gimmick Infringement Podcast. I am Brad Winchester, and with me, as always, is my tag team partner, Tyler McDowell Blanken. But Tyler, we are not alone.
No, we are not. We have a very special guest in the building today. He hosts the Baseline NBA podcast and Dope Interviews. We are joined by 19 Media co-founder Warren Shaw. Warren, this is your long-awaited GI debut. Welcome to the show. How are you, family?
Well, I appreciate you both having me on. It is long awaited. You had to make a topic available that I could actually speak coherently about. So I appreciate you for, not embarrassing myself, and hopefully I don't embarrass myself later on the show, but excited to be with you guys. As we said off air, you are truly the lifeblood of what we do here at 19 Media Group. So I'm so excited to finally be in the virtual building podcasting with you all outside of our normal conversations on social media or wherever else.
Amazing. Well, Warren, we're thrilled that you're here. Thank you so much for your kind words. Obviously, this episode is dedicated to processing the Mr. McMahon Netflix docuseries. We're going to review kind of the totality of it, all 6 parts, not one by one necessarily, but our takeaways. We have some very pointed questions that we want to get your thoughts on, Warren. Before we get to that conversation, though, you alluded to this 19 Media Group celebrating its 3rd anniversary this month, October 2024. It's a big deal. Warren, how are you feeling about the network as we lean directly into this really important milestone?
Well, thank you for asking. Honestly, I do appreciate the question. 19's in a great space, honestly. We have the right people, I think, on the network in terms of the talent. We're not looking to overgrow. And I think a lot of networks in general, I've been a part of networks where they were just in the talent accumulation, not worried about what the quality of that talent was. I think we've been very intentional about what we've been doing, especially in the latter years here too. And that's not to be disparaging to anybody who's no longer with us, but I think we all know what we needed to do. And I think everybody's in a better creative space as a result of that movement. And we shared with you off air kind of some plans for the network, some potential growth, bringing in, infusing, again, the right talent that can maybe take the network into a different space than it is, right? And obviously we're sports heavy, but lifestyle, culture, travel, all these things are things that we have interest in, even as individuals. So if we can get to a space where we can bring that content to our listeners and those who don't know they need us just yet, that'll be an amazing situation. But these 3 years they've been a whirlwind. We've learned a lot. I think we've learned a lot together. Mm-hmm. Even me being in the podcasting industry, previous to this for, nearly a decade, even before that. But at the same time, running a network, if you will, too. And I try to be very cautious about the words that I utilize. We're all working together. I'm nobody's supervisor. I'm not bossing anybody around. I'm not going to, throw the match for you and me and count you to 3 unceremoniously. Wow. This is very much a family oriented situation. So 19 Media Group, again, is for the people amplifying voices together.
No Fort Lauderdale screw jobs around here.
No screw jobs.
Yeah.
Well, you can follow Warren at Shaw Sports NBA, as you can see on the screen here. Shout out to our audio listeners as well. We refer to Warren as the hardest working man, not only in 19 Media Group, but in all of show business. Check him out. Follow his work. He was at Miami Heat's Media Day. He covers the NBA, as you know, with Cali on the Baseline. Again, dope interviews, though. Guests from Hollywood, the Hardwood, and more. You can even follow him for Sade reviews. This is true. We discussed Sade before we clicked record. Warren, versatile. I'm so excited. I'm going to kick it to Brad for this next one. Personally, Warren, I'm so excited that you are here on a wrestling-centric edition of GI, because we, meaning myself, our audience, don't know your full relationship to professional wrestling. So right. I think now is a great time to transition. I'll maybe ask the first question and then I'll kick it to you, Brad. Warren, what is your relationship to this industry that Brad and I love so much in pro wrestling?
Yeah. So obviously you guys are rooted in it, like today, in present time. My relationship stems from, many years ago when I was a wee lad, as they say, and just kind of like watching the WWF at that time, kind of really on its rise, if you will, in the late 80s, early 90s, whatever. Obviously, it's hard to mention wrestling without talking about Hogan. So that's somebody who I saw, but Jimmy Superfly Snuka, Ricky Steamboat Dragon. Like, I mean, just, I had a friend, a colleague of mine, or a neighbor rather, should say, and he ended up getting like the wrestling dolls and got the little ring or whatever the case may be. And, Paul Orndorff and guys like that, way from back in that day. And we used to, hey, you're wrestling with them or whatever the case.
You would have your matches. Yeah. You would book your shows. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the era that I kind of grew up in. Then fell out of it. I'd say, I don't even remember what time period I saw at the time, and I won't make this, answer too long, but at the time WCW was an inferior product. So I was like, what is that foolishness over there? My co-host on the Baseline, Cal, he was actually, a really big wrestling fan back in that day as well too. Oh my God, I see their faces. I can't remember their names right now too, but they basically wore like the punk rock with spikes.
Yeah, it's the Road Warriors.
The Road Warriors, yeah.
Or Demolition if it ended up being them.
You and Cal make the occasional reference on your show, yeah.
Really so good. He was into that, and I was like, all right, it's a little weird for me, but you got it, bro. And so I kind of just left it alone. Then really got into playing basketball myself personally, and so I ended up having less time to even kind of watch TV if it wasn't basketball or the more traditional sports. And then I'll say I was reinvigorated in college in the WCW NWO era. Even named my intramural basketball team the new NBO, New Basketball Order. I was a huge fan. I was a huge fan. Yes, sir. And we were good. We were good.
You had to be with that name.
We were good. Yeah. So we had a couple of intramural seasons where we did well back at the University of Central Florida. Shout out to my Knights. And then NWO got a little weird too. And so I just kind of left the wrestling scene kind of all together. I was adjacent to it, I guess that's Attitude Era, John Cena and so forth and so forth. Or that's right after, I think maybe, but John Cena, The Rock, all that. So I wasn't watching regular basis, but they were such larger than life stars, Stone Cold as well too, that you'd see them on, I don't know, I guess we didn't have social media and things like that, but I saw them in some sort of clips here and there. And then all the catchphrases, do you smell what The Rock is cooking? It doesn't matter what your name is, all that stuff. And because Stone Cold said so, all those things, right? Those things carried over into everyday life, even if you weren't really a wrestling fan. Same thing with DX and, right? So
100%.
That's how
you don't have to go into that. Yeah, we know.
So to me, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And while as we were talking after, I didn't know all the behind the scenes things and the true characters of some of these individuals. The pop culture of it all was really, really influential in a lot of the stuff that I did and the people that I was around as we did as well too. Even if we weren't watching every Monday night or Sunday or whatever the case may be. The one thing I'll jump to and then kind of jump back in is when we're watching the McMahon series, I forgot all about friggin' Saturday Night's Main Event. Tyler, you're probably too young for that, but that used to be a friggin' vibe, son. It was Saturday Night's Main Event was something I look forward to, and I had that, and I think it came on right before or right after Saturday Night Live. I was just yo, and I think there was a Macho Man Randy Savage match on Saturday Night's Main Event with Miss Elizabeth that I'll always remember too. So that's my relationship, long and short. I'm not in it like that, like you all here on a regular basis, but the nostalgia of it is something that still rings true for me today.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I had a question for you, and you already answered it. I was going to ask your relationship with wrestling and as it pertains to basketball, but you had the NBO. So what more is there to add there? But I had a similar. I guess a similar experience that I shared this with Tyler, our walkout music for my JV basketball team when I was playing JV hoops, 10th grade was we played the DX theme. The DX theme would play, and as soon as it would go, break it down, we all ran out of the locker room. That was our walkout music.
Hey, Brad, fans held up the X in the audience. Was that what was the crowd reaction?
The crowd reaction, the 20 people that were there cheered when we ran out onto the court. I think they were confused. It was JV, the kids, the student section had not shown up yet for the varsity game. We were playing. We were the warm up act for the varsity basketball game that was going to play afterwards. So there weren't a lot of people there. So it was mostly for us. But we were always Our coach made sure. I think our coach was watching the product. I'm pretty sure, or at least he knew what was going on because he made sure to tell us that you cannot be crotch chopping the crowd, each other, the opponents, anything like that. So yes, it was definitely a thing.
Well, you were a star in your role, and I think that's an important situation.
Yes.
And shout out to Joel Embiid, who's bringing back the Crocs chop.
Yeah.
You know, in
Yes.
more recent
Yes.
years here as well too.
And Warren, even Dame Lillard. Well, this was maybe 2-3 years ago when he showed up in Stone Cold cosplay to a game.
Right.
Giannis Antetokounmpo, one of the best players in the world, a noted wrestling fan. There's a lot of crossover.
Yeah, the crossover is absolutely real. And, you know, I think it's, as they say, art imitates life in a lot of ways. And I think in the music business, they always say, you know, rappers want to be athletes and athletes want to be rappers. But I think there's always the aspect of, you know, athletes want to be other athletes as well, too. And, you know, the WWE is very much an entertainment business. And, you know, if you were to run down the list of celebrities that have participated in WWE at one point or not, like it's long. It's long. It's countless. So I think it's something that you know, is always going to have a certain place here. But I'm interested to see kind of what happens, you know, in the next coming years, with, you know, Triple H kind of truly at the helm, and what he and The Rock, I guess, and what they'll be able to do to sustain what has been 40, 50 years of legacy here with wrestling, even more than that.
Yeah, to your point with WCW, I think I was thinking back, where was that first one? Athletes have crossed over into professional wrestling from basketball to make a career out of it when they, you know, it didn't work out or there was an injury or whatever. But I was thinking about the tag team match with Diamond Dallas Page and Karl Malone against Hulk Hogan, and yes,
another deplorable individual.
Exactly. That's why I brought it up, because it was Dennis Rodman teaming with Hulk Hogan, and DDP and then Rodman being the two least problematic people in that match is not something any of us were thinking at that time, because we were all like, oh, it's Rodman. It's clearly Rodman. Yeah. And having him being like, I don't know, third or fourth in that list is pretty incredible looking back at that.
Well, I'll transition us in this note. I think, you know, the aspect of the self high five is something I still utilize today, you know, especially if somebody leaves me hanging. I'm like, all right, self high five.
Cue the music. I love that. Well, speaking of transitions, Warren, so speaking about this documentary, it's been in production for many years. There were stops, there were starts. It's a lot of news now following the release of this documentary. First official question for you on Netflix's Mr. McMahon. What was your overall experience watching this documentary? It sounds like there was footage that elicited a lot of memories and, dare I say, some nostalgia for you. I would imagine you also learned a lot of new information about the business, behind the scenes, and just kind of where we're at today with professional wrestling. What was your overall experience checking out this 6-part docuseries?
Yeah, brother, you hit it. I think nostalgia first and foremost. It comes out after real news has kind of caught up, you know, to where the series is. So you have that playing in the forefront of your mind, even as you're watching it as well, too. It's like, all right, well, they're going to get to this. No, it's a footnote at the beginning or at the end, you know, as opposed to any on-camera interviews when it's kind of talking about that. So for me, where I've seen people have been disappointed in it, and we can talk about the production side of it, you know, I guess at some point too. Once I understood that was going to be the case, like I reset my expectations. Like we're not going to be able to get to this because from a production side, they couldn't. They needed to get it out. They filmed this years ago. I mean, there's footage from, you know, 6-7 years ago that they have in this thing, you know, that they're now putting out here in 2024. But the nostalgia was real. Like it was like, I just remembered a lot of stuff. I did learn, you know, about Vince. You know, I didn't know much about his childhood. I guess I never cared to look, you know, and understanding like who he was as an individual, as a young boy, you know, but it doesn't give excuses. It does provide perspective. You know, and I can say this even, you know, even in my real job, like at one point we had a team builder some months ago and people ended up sharing something personal to them. And as they were going around the room, I was like, oh, that's why she thinks this way. Like, that's why. So for me, like some people thought it was torturous and didn't like it, but I got so much perspective because I'm very reflective, and I always want to understand the human experience. And so for me, I think in some people, for some people it humanized Vince a little bit. I don't know if it did that for me. I just understood a little bit more of his perspective, not to excuse what he's been able to do, but it's like, well, maybe this is why he is in some ways twisted because he didn't have the greatest upbringing, and those things have long lasting effects, you know, and you can't always see that in the here and now. But to answer your question a little bit more directly, he said, and the nostalgia was probably the thing I got the most out of it, with a little bit of perspective overall as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just recently gone through Jabari Davis recommended I listen to Behind the Bastards podcast. There's a multi-part, I want to say 4-part podcast series about Vince McMahon that goes into a little bit more depth. The way that they did it was a little, how do I say it? The tone wasn't as formal as this documentary was. They were a lot of joking around and a lot of that, but hearing about his background and his upbringing really, you know, exactly what you said. I say it to my students all the time. This doesn't excuse what happened. It just explains what happened. And it's one of those things where it's like, yes, the stuff with superstar Billy Graham had nothing to do with it. He was catching touchdowns years later. Superstar Billy Graham had more of an impact on him based on the stories that came out of that. I know he wanted to be just like him and go speeding and all these other things, but there was some stuff that was left out of the documentary that I thought was interesting, that painted more of a picture about how influential all of that was. Vince also talked about getting in fights a lot. And according to sources close to the situation, i.e. his friends growing up, in the Behind the Bastards series, it was like, yeah, he never got in fights. That wasn't a thing he did. He was just making all of that up. But it's one of those things, you know, with people with trauma, a lot of times people will paint a better picture of themselves and then just believe it happened. And now they're not lying, but it also never happened. And it's really interesting how that happened. So I don't know I guess the overall is one of the quotes that he said was, I think in the first episode, where they're like, well, what happened? He's like, oh man, if I really told you all the things, like what? It was like, oh, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm going to keep that hidden. It's how much of Vince is actually real, how much of it is hidden, how much of it is made up. And he's just being a showman, even when it's about him personally. It's impossible for us to know. So I walked away with it going, I saw a lot of things that I hadn't seen before. I was, you know, reminded of things that I did know about. But I did walk away still going, what was real and what wasn't real, and who were the people? Were there more people other than Bruce Pritchard and his wife that he actually had a positive impact on? Because it obviously all the people that he employed that made money and went on to have successful lives and careers because of this, he obviously helped those people. But you know, what was the cost? Is it worth it? And all of the kind of existential questions that come out of that, I was left still thinking about by the time the series was over.
Yeah, I'll just say this, you know, and Tyler, I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I think, Brad, intentionally ambiguous. And that can be frustrating, I think, for the viewer, right? Depending on what you're expecting to kind of get out of it. Also, from my understanding, you know, Bill Simmons has a lot to do with this project, or, you know, produced it, or the case to be, and he's a great sports film documentarian. So in some ways you're like, all right, well, Bill couldn't get it out, you know, but I think, as you alluded to, the opening scene is just exactly that. And if you're watching that, would you not believe he's an a-hole? So how hard would it to believe that he got into a lot of fights as a kid? No, sure, I'd buy that in a heartbeat. With you didn't have to tell me that, I would have probably assumed that.
Right. Yeah.
You know, but you know, then to come to find out, well, maybe that's not as true, and that's just part of the persona of Mr. McMahon. And that's where I think, you know, my wife was watching some of it with me as well too, and she was just like, well, what's really going on? And I was like, well, he doesn't really want us to know.
Yeah. Right. Yes.
Like, this is still a show. I mean, everything, like the things that come out to me, you know, even the aspect, like he was dead ass serious about wanting to put Stephanie and Hunter's wedding, you know, on pay-per-view. I was like,
yes,
yeah, you probably were dead ass about that.
If it makes dollars, it makes sense, Warren.
It's great. Ruthless in terms of just the business. He would do anything for $1. And again, on one hand, and that's the conflict, because you can admire the stick-to-itiveness of it, right? Like the sheer desire, like it's always about business, but that has real repercussions to us as a society, obviously to his family as well too. And I don't want to send us careening, but the one thing I'll say about this, and then I absolutely will shut up, is the Succession line. Like, I don't know if you ever watched that series or whatever the case may be, but I was like, yo, it's real life Succession for real.
Yes.
I mean, I was like, you have Shiv, you have, I was just like, this is 1,000% what this is. And everyone is just trying to please daddy and they're looking for his approval. And he was like, yeah, F you, you'll never get it. So anyway.
Well, no, to your point, they did bring that up quite a bit. You know, he had to prove, he always talked about having to prove it to his dad and trying to make him proud and make him, you know, on his last day saying he loves him or he's proud of him or whatever it was. And that was the only time he ever said it in his life that he actually knew him. Because I think he was 11 or 12 when he finally met him for the first time. But the trying to get his father's approval and constantly trying to prove himself to him, and then going, well, I didn't want to do that to my own kids, and then doing exactly that thing to his own kids for his entire run is wild. But I think it wasn't until the last 1 or 2 episodes that it really stuck with me that we don't really know this, and if he's telling the truth, because he's like, did we toe the line? Well, no, we didn't have guns on TV. And then they showed the clips of Brian Pillman and, you know, Stone Cold firing a shotgun at Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and just stuff where it's like, well, we didn't do this. And then there's a clip of him doing that. We didn't do this. And there's a clip and it's just how much of it is, well, I forgot we did that. And how much of it is, no, I'm just trying to say the thing to make it appear not and not to make it all political here, but there was a significant portion about him and Donald Trump and just the similarities between the two as, you know, promoters and showmen is unbelievable. Like it's almost the same person. And
it resonated with me so like problematically.
Yes. In all the ways you don't want that to happen. Yes. All of it. Yeah. It's wild.
Well, Brad and I were talking about looking at, and this is not to get too political, but even I think it's just an inherent fact, looking at the Republican convention from, months ago at this point, it was very much a pro wrestling production to the point where Hulk Hogan
was tearing the shirt
was
off.
a highlighted speaker. The pro wrestling-fication of politics is fascinating. I want to stick with the family element, guys, because I think it was episode 5, Family Business, to me was the most poignant episode.
Yeah.
As fathers, right? Both of you guys are proud dads. What is your take on the Shane McMahon element of this? Because I shared this on our recording last week here, that Shane McMahon was, if we had to pick winners from this docuseries, Shane was my number one. There's speculation that he could be heading to AEW in the coming weeks in Q4. I find that fascinating, but I thought the way Shane was presented was very much in the sense that the audience felt for him. And maybe it resonated with a lot of audience members in terms of, you guys laid it out perfectly, much like Vince was doing. Shane was simply seeking the approval and the love of his dad. It is that vicious cycle. So I'm wondering, as fathers, how did that resonate with you, the Vince and Shane relationship?
Go ahead, Brad.
I thought, first of all, I think I agree with you that it's probably Shane as the winner there, but also the way that people spoke about Stephanie. I mean, as a leader and as a, you know, when they did bring it up, because we talked about this when it happened, when we were in it, we did our show and recorded it right afterward, when Vince stepped back into the boardroom to prepare for the TKO merger, or I guess the UFC merger, whatever that was, that Stephanie stepped down right after that happened. And that we knew that, well, there was somebody on the board had said, no, I'm not, we don't want you here or whatever. And then, so he came back and was like, well, I own it, so I'm replacing all the members of the board. And she was like, well, I'm going to leave.
Right.
It's pretty clear who that person was without even be able to confirm it. It's very clear who that person was, which is you could look at it as this is a best for business standpoint, I think. Right. Because clearly she's like, well, that's my dad. Shane, it's the same thing,
right.
But it's also having him around with all of this stuff going on is pretty terrible for the brand and the company. So
Well,
I thought,
and Brad, that was a contrast from, I forget the exact timeline, but when allegations about Vince started coming out, you remember there was that SmackDown. This goes to Warren's
they had it
point.
on the clip. Yeah.
Yeah, where it was advertised for SmackDown, Vince McMahon is going to appear in the wake of all these allegations, and of course, ratings were up for the show. So again, there's a profit incentive. But Stephanie, I hope this wasn't a different episode.
It was a different episode.
Different, yeah.
It was when he announced his retirement.
Thank you. When he announced his retirement, and Stephanie introduces him, "Hey, let's give it up for Vince," and then
thank you, Vince chance.
Thank you, Vince chance. So luckily, yeah, to your point, luckily, after that, we saw that Stephanie stepped away, because the idea that as fans we would cheer for him, or at least people in that venue, and then reported that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too, Warren. But Brad, I want to kick it back to you. I couldn't believe that particular night Vince goes backstage and allegedly says, "F them all. I'm here. F them all. We're gonna stay." Yeah. The lack of self-awareness that he purports to have is just I find it deeply disturbing.
Yeah,
but yeah, one of my takeaways.
100%. Yeah,
docuseries. Please. I
was going to say that clip, Warren. If you didn't see what happened live when he went out there, and they played the No Chance music, and he came out, walked out with the mic, and they showed the clipper of him saying "Welcome to SmackDown" and throwing the mic into the ring, and then walking back. That's literally all he did. So that night it was like Vince McMahon will appear. He's going to open the show. We all were like, oh, he's going to address the allegations. He came out, went, "Welcome to SmackDown," threw the mic and walked away. And then went back there. He went backstage into gorilla position and said, "F him." Like, F them all.
F them all.
And then the next week, I believe, is when he retired. And then
it's the Vince character. It's like, this is what Warren brought up earlier. And that's what Vince has clearly he's thrived on over the years, is blurring that line between what is fiction and what is reality. He was doing that until the very end of his on-screen career in WWE.
And decades. He alluded to that at the end of the series, right? Like in that part of the interview, which was probably early. My guess is that was one of the first questions. So, and it just ended up making sense at the end of the video.
The sequencing,
because it just seems like, well, who is Mr. McMahon versus Vince McMahon seems like the most obvious question to start with. And I liked the placement. It made sense to lead out with, well, I'm not really sure, because Ric Flair in particular talked about how he stopped being Ric Flair and just became that character. He just is Ric Flair, and there's no difference anymore. At some point he became so committed to it that he just became that thing. And I can't possibly see how Vince McMahon, who would go to bed at like midnight, get up at 3 a.m. to work out every single day, wonder why people aren't working, have all ultimate control over creative, the business part, all of it, wouldn't, and then becoming an on-screen talent, wouldn't just sort of become that on-screen talent, but his fathered, Vince Senior'd Shane when Shane was like, "I want to do the UFC thing." And he's like, "Well, my dad told me if I want to buy it, you got to figure out the money. You got this much time. And if you don't get it, I keep the money and you don't get to own the company." And he figured out how to get it there, and which is great. But he's like, "No, Shane, you don't have the money, so you can't do it." And I think like now when WWE merged with UFC, and I believe UFC was worth more money, Shane was right. And had he been supportive, well, would it have turned out the same way? I don't know. We can't know that for sure. And even Shane said hindsight is 2020, but he had a pretty good idea for that, and going like, this is going to be a thing. We should do this. And he even had some ideas that didn't work at the time with what is it? Raw Underground, when we were in the pandemic area, to make it look like a fight pit. And then they're doing fight pit matches that are just Raw Underground. So like that idea stuck later on, where Shane's not even in the company anymore. He's had really good ideas that, had he had that backing and support, probably could have made them even more money. But Vince didn't want to just let his kid have the money. You know, you can make a parallel there with Shad Khan, giving Tony Khan access to his billions of dollars to start a rival wrestling company, which just signed a 5-year agreement with Warner Brothers Discovery to keep AEW on TV and keep it going, which, you know, ultimately it's like $175 million deal, I believe, around there per year, which is a lot for a wrestling deal, for a wrestling company that's only a few years old. That'll help fill that void now that, you know, NBA coverage isn't going to be there. Like it was, they have some other live product that they can put on TV, which is really cool. That doesn't happen if Shad Khan doesn't go, yeah, kid, I support you. Ultimately, it's not that much money to get this thing going. It's an investment. I believe in you. And that investment paid off, where Vince was like, no, I couldn't do it, so you can't do it. Prove it to me, pal. And it's so strange to me as a father. I just, I don't have that kind of money. But if Freya's like, I got this idea for a lemonade stand, and this is what no doubt. We're going to go to Home Depot. We're going to buy some lumber. We're going to set it up, get you a little fan in there, because it's 1,000 degrees in October for some reason. And we're going to let it rip. It was strange.
No, I mean, it's interesting for me because I wasn't the biggest Shane O'Mac fan. Watching him in real time, I'd say I probably didn't care. I wouldn't say that I disliked him.
He grew on me eventually too. It took me about a decade, but no, I'm with you.
But I think even through the series, it's kind of almost indicative of his life, because he's like a little bit like he's sprinkled in. And then in that, I think it's that 5th episode, like you see like true, like it's the family episode. So he's in it like more gloriously as well. But I was like, wow, if that's not a microcosm of his life, always kind of having to wait his turn. Yeah. And ironically, it was the one episode that my wife watched the most with me. And so even seeing, and I was like, when you're watching it in real time, you don't know, because you don't know all the stuff behind it. But how he was like this death-defying, wrestler, throwing himself off the top of 30-foot cages and whatever the case may be.
Oh, the Kurt
like, no, bro, don't do it. And I was hurting. I didn't even see it in real time, so I can't say I was reliving it. But when he was like, was it Stone Cold he was wrestling, and they were trying to throw him through the glass?
Kurt Angle.
Oh, Kurt Angle.
Sorry, Kurt Angle. And the glass didn't break. All right, do it again. And my wife's like, yo, what kind of maniac? Like, what is this?
They sprayed the glass with fire retardant because of the pyro, and then it just made it incredibly strong, and nobody knew it. So it was supposed to go easily through it. Instead, he got dropped on his head like 5 times.
Right. When he dropped on his head, my wife was like, yo, it's like, she grabbed, because it happened years ago, whatever, but you see that and you can't help but feel. And then you understand what that emotion is coming from. Like, really what it is. Yes, it's the business, but it's like, yo, really, this is just a son trying to impress his dad type shit. Excuse my French. Like, it's that can really get to you. So I agree in the aspect of like, winners of the series, and I don't know what physical damage he has right now. He looked great, at least on air, on TV. It looked like, he has all his faculties and whatever the case may be. But there was a sense of pride that, he was able to finally, at least in a moment, win his dad over for all the stuff that he had been put through. And to me, that was something that was viable. And I enjoyed watching that for somebody who I did not care about, during the time that he was probably at his height.
Warren, how did the contrast between Stephanie and Shane resonate with you in terms of, as Brad laid out, these two as business figures, as leaders? We were speaking about this off air. In the documentary, the contrast is made that Shane is too kind. He's too nice. Right. Yeah, he's too soft. He's a nice guy, but perhaps that's why he wasn't chosen by his dad to lead the company into the future. As someone who leads people, granted, higher education, pro wrestling, two very different industries, but leadership, kindness, yet not being a pushover. How did that resonate with you, if at all?
Well, funny you should ask. I think at this particular time in my life where I'm having some professional struggles, right? Because I think I've always been a nurturer. I've always tried to be a nice individual. And I wouldn't say try, I've done so. I think I've done so. And that's part of like even means like I need to be able to stand in my power, if you will, more. I try not to throw it around because I realize, hey, we all put on our pants the same way. And it's like I always say, like we work with each other. But sometimes you need to just be a boss. Like you need to stand on proverbial business. And I believe it was Tony Atlas who was just like, yeah. You weren't going to push Stephanie over. Like she was about that life. And I couldn't get that from watching her on TV. Like, I don't know. Like she was just a character. I had no idea what was going on the business side. So for me, she would be an even more fascinating, deeper dive,
100%.
To kind of understand exactly. All right, well,
100%.
What made her so ruthless? What made her so, such a powerful leader? where these, 250, 300-pound men were like, okay, whatever you say. Like they didn't want.
Yeah, we're not gonna mess with her. She had the respect of the locker room, like Brad said.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and that says a lot, especially even for her role in forwarding the women's movement in wrestling as well too. Like, again, whatever you want to say about her, those are things that ultimately do matter. So, I say this all the time. For the most part, nobody is all good or all bad. And even the monsters in our world, they have families and they have people and things that they care about. And so I'm not trying to compare Stephanie to being a monster in any capacity, but it's like, no matter what you thought about her as a business person, she had clear goals that actually benefited society, especially when it came to the promotion of women's wrestling in general. So that's not something that I knew she had that big of a role in, because to me, her and Shane were just, again, Succession characters before Succession wasn't a thing, just like playing it out on TV. So I was just like, okay, yeah, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Vince really is in charge. Who cares what any of them got going on? I didn't know what role either of them really had in terms of the creative and or the business aspect. So to me, that was really enlightening. But, kudos to her for being able to be, a strong woman in a male-dominated business, for the last X amount of years.
Yeah, she had a profound impact, and I'm with you. I think she's the most interesting person in all of this. I think fighting for WWE Evolution, which is the women's pay-per-view, all women's pay-per-view, which I don't know why they haven't run that every year, because they have the talent and I think people would tune in. And now that they're doing some stuff back and forth with TNA, they have access to other talent and other companies as well. And I just think it's an absolute no-brainer that people would tune into that. And I mean, Tyler and I would. I actually enjoy half the time, probably, if not more, women's wrestling more than I do men's, because it's just so much more athletic overall. It's like they're all working a lucha libre style. And then sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're just absolute hosses out there, like Nia Jax and Piper Niven, and there's a host of others. But I think she's really interesting. She's also worked a lot with Connor's Cure. I don't know who set that up ultimately, but I know she's done that. She's done a lot on the giving back side of things for WWE, especially after they went public. I think that was the biggest shift, more than likely, because they didn't really go into how the company really changed once WWE went public, because the corporate machine took off from there. It became a large business entity versus a promotion, and things started churning. They're like, well, with the advent of the network and all of these things, and I'm like, man, they really blew past all of this, because yes, Vince was in charge of creative, but it kind of felt like they jumped forward 15 years. I don't know how you guys felt, but it was just like there was a 15-year gap there where they talked about John Cena coming into the company, and the next thing you know, it's the 2022 stuff going down. I thought that was a little weird, but maybe that's for a different conversation here. But I think Stephanie walked away looking really good from all of this, and I think Shane did too. But I would love at some point to hear Stephanie's story, because it's just incredibly interesting. You met the love of your life and the person you married in a storyline. It's just wild. Yeah.
Tyler, I want to ask you a question. I think regarding the children, how do you feel, not necessarily how they are represented, but Vince, we know, is like the ultimate, we have no idea who he is. Jekyll and Hyde, don't know where the line kind of crosses. Do you get that in terms of, Stephanie and Shane? Do you feel like we act like how they were portrayed is how they really are?
It's a great question, Warren. I would say yes. I think we have much more clarity on who we perceive them to be than we do Vince. And I agree with you both. I believe both Stephanie and Shane overall were presented in a positive light. It goes back to what you said, Warren. Much like the three of us, all these people we're talking about, there's so much nuance to it, right? It's not as clear as good or bad. I mean, for Vince, I think there's more clarity, but for his children, for a lot of the wrestlers covered in this documentary, it's just super nuanced. So I think, yeah, we have a pretty strong idea at this point who they are. And fortunately, not only have both Shane and Stephanie contributed to the business in positive ways, as you two so eloquently described, but they also seem like people, by and large, we can feel good supporting and rooting for. The moral compass, as best as we can discern, moral compass seems, fairly intact with both of Vince's children.
Yeah. I think I hope that's the case, right?
Because I certainly hope so.
Right.
I've invested so much time and money into the company.
Yeah, I mean, since
age 5. I hope so.
I don't want to say anything negative because obviously I don't know, right? But at some point, like if you're raised by a certain type of individual, as we're talking about Vince being, you know, a product of his proverbial environment, and maybe that fueled some of the decisions he's made, you know, as an individual. If Vince is always in character, you know, then how and when do his children recognize, like, I don't need to follow that route?
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that's like that would have me on pause. And I guess that's part of the mystery of it all. And while they'll always continue to make money because you never really know. But I would agree with you, Tyler, as I feel like we got the most authentic selves of Shane and Stephanie, as we're probably entitled to get, I guess. But it's in the back of my mind is like, all right, well, if my dad is this person who's always been in character, always in entertainment, how do they not kind of embody that in the same way? But maybe that's why, maybe we know because Shane left, you know, and that was a real thing. You know, he left, Stephanie left. That was a real thing. So maybe they are completely separate individuals, you know, of their father.
Yeah, Warren, I found it fascinating that we have a fourth member of this family in Linda McMahon, who was also presented. Even though they are a family, they were presented as 4 very individual, unique characters.
Yeah.
Warren, you mentioned footage you had never seen or forgot. Guys, I totally forgot about the storyline with Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon, and Trish Stratus in the wheelchair where Linda was
paralyzed.
Linda was comatose, paralyzed, and Trish and Vince are doing these awful things. The fact that I was consuming that at such a tender age is just it's just wild looking back on it. So that leads me at least into my last question for you, Warren, and Brad. Certainly would love to hear your POV on this. In a business full of subjectivity, much like the sports world that you're so familiar with, Warren, where, you know, we all have our favorite teams and players and our own GOATs, Vince McMahon, one of my takeaways, is undoubtedly the most important figure, the most influential figure in the history of professional wrestling. Furthermore, he and Hulk Hogan are inextricably linked with each other. And for a while on this documentary, and before just my years of following, it felt very Brady and Belichickian to me. Like, these two guys are the faces of pro wrestling and are most responsible for why it's become the behemoth it is today. I'm curious, Warren, how does that sit with you? Moreover, how do you wrestle with, no pun intended, these two guys who I think the 3 of us have rooted for, especially Hulk, in earlier years, now all these years later, finding out about either their shady business practices or how they've treated women or how they speak about the Black community? Like, how do you guys wrestle with that? These people who were influential to our childhood, to our college experience, we probably wore the t-shirts, and then now finding out they're relative heathens.
Oh,
what's the legacy? What are the feelings you have? I don't regret all the years I spent consuming the product, but I think about, and then I promise I'll kick it to you, Warren. I showed this with Brad last week. I really think about, okay, the Attitude Era in particular, right? Late 90s, early 2000s, when I was in elementary school. What I was taught from watching this product, specifically about sex, about women, about gender expression and masculinity. I'll step off my high horse, but it's become clear to me that I've had to spend some years unlearning a lot of this. Warren, even at my tender age now of 31, I still grapple with my last wrestling reference. I still grapple with some of what I've learned through video games, through watching Monday Night Raw, and how they presented Sable and what Vince was doing. It still affects my everyday life, outside of just being a fan, just how I try to live my life. Your thoughts, Mr. Shaw?
Yeah, I mean, I think all the puns you utilize are appropriate, right? Because it is a wrestle. It is, you're battling your moral compass, if you will, the integrity, you know, of it. Even kind of what we've learned as we've gotten into 2024 here now, what was taboo then is completely different from what's taboo now. You know, it's just a different time. And if you try to reconcile all of that in a way, you know, you might really need to seek professional help, because like there's just no way to do it. And I think you have to, in this case, and how I'm doing is like, I have to give myself some semblance of grace, not to excuse, But again, it was a different time, and now I know better, and know I cannot continue down that path and support some of those things. I mean, we're in a situation, we're in a time where musicians and actors and all and people we used to air quote love, they're not good people. They're downright rotten individuals. And so now it's like, how do you continue to support them or not support them in whatever fashion that is, right? So I mean, there's countless musicians, people, you know, one whose wedding songs were played, you know, in his honor, if you will, so to speak. And it's like, all right, well, does that mean your wedding is a farce now? No. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like, it's tough, right? And I think each person has to deal with that subjectively. I'm Jamaican, you know, by blood, and you know, Vibes Cartel was recently released from prison, and you know, for the uninitiated, you know, he was sentenced to jail for however many years because he was involved in an alleged murder. And so again, he's now out, whether that evidence ultimately was circumstantial and so forth and so forth. But from the music, from the artist side, he's one of the greatest dancehall artists of all time. And it's undisputed in terms of the record sales, the vibes, everything that's been created. But is he a good individual? You know, that's between him and God. And now it's up between me whether or not I want to continue to support his current music, his future music, and his past music. And those are just, I think, the decisions that we're all faced with having to make once these things become public, right? I mean, we can talk about it. Like, I never liked Diddy. He's not somebody I cared about as an individual. I didn't like him personally. Didn't really like the way he rapped or whatever the case would be. I like Notorious Big though. So, you know, so is it guilt by association? And like, so you'll drive yourself crazy and kind of in an endless loop, you know, trying to figure all of those things out. Do the best you can with the information that you have now, you know, and I think influence, you know, your sphere in the same way. But I can't vilify people who said, you know what, this, that, or the third. I know for me, here's what I got to do moving forward.
Yeah, well said. It's a conversation Tyler and I have often about being able to separate the art from the artist and going like, I can appreciate, like, I'm not going to apologize to people because I was absolutely, and so was everybody else I knew, a Hulkamaniac. Yeah. Every single one of us tried to do the shirt pull rip thing. couldn't pull it off. Do it. No, you had a big stretched out t-shirt that your mom's yelling at you about now because you were trying to do the thing. And like everybody did that stuff. We would, well, let me tell you something, brother. I thought of Hulk Hogan every time I had vitamins. You know, the Flintstone chewables, right? Like, say your prayers, take your vitamins. Yes, I know. Unlock that core memory. It's just one of those things where it's, you know, like, this is awesome. Chris Jericho comes up with us a lot. His wife is very outspoken about, I'm proud of being there on January 6th and all of these things. And he says, I'm not political, and then donates to political entities and has been accused of some stuff that got thrown out. So who knows what happened there, and who knows if there are NDAs we don't know about or anything like that. But it's also like he was really entertaining. That he had my favorite debut of all time. And I love that character work. And until he's arrested and put behind bars, I don't know how I should feel about this person. Yeah. Do I hate this character because in real life he's an asshole? Because, you know, like we were talking earlier, I brought up Val Venus. That guy, I can't remember, Morley, right? Like, that's his last name. Lives in our state and is, by all evidence, not a good dude. That he's just not a good dude, but also not a criminal. And I can look back and go, yeah, at the time, Val Venus was awesome. The Godfather, everybody was yelling, come on aboard the hoe train. Everybody was yelling that. I've been pimping hoes nationwide. Like, everybody was doing these things.
Wild dude. Yeah.
Yes. It is just like, we kind of forget, like, you put on a hat, you find a feather. Like, that's what you're going to do.
Yeah. And these guys, Brad, these guys are at signings and at shows all the time up here in the Phoenix area because we have that nostalgia for watching them, you know, in yesteryear.
but there's also, you know, like we didn't know at the time, probably because we were young and kind of stupid, but it's obvious now looking at it, like, okay, before he was the Godfather, he was also, and before he was in the Nation of Domination, he was wearing voodoo paint and cursing people, and it's all the same guy. It's just so
characters,
so strange. Yeah, all the
Different
characters.
than Valving, yeah.
Tugboat was a character before and after he was Tugboat. We have all our Earthquake, same thing. We have all these different characters that have gone in and out. And sometimes the worst characters, the worst bad guy characters, end up being like the best people in the world. I was going to use this as a transition out. Chris Nowinski was a heel for being a Harvard grad. His entire character was like he graduated from Harvard. Wow. And that's why we should hate him, because he's smarter than us. And he legitimately did, until he had a terrible concussion. He is the leader in concussion research. He and his foundation, they actually interviewed him for the documentary and had him in there talking about CTE after Chris Benoit, and hearing people like Stone Cold going like, CTE is not real. I don't believe in it. And then not having Mick Foley on the podcast to talk about concussions, where he does live shows and sometimes forgets what he's saying in the middle of it, because it's just, he's had hundreds of concussions in his life. It's just really complicated. And to your point, Warren, if we try to start going back in time and trying to, you know, parse all the things that we looked at, watched, consumed at that time, or the music we listened to, or the shows we watched, or, you know, the characters that we loved, and then start looking behind the curtain. Like I still like Seven. I think Seven is a great movie. I love that movie. Kevin Spacey's in it. I'm not going to be like, well, I'm done with that now. That movie is now a bad movie. That's not how that works. So it's just, it's hard to separate sometimes, but I think it's important we do so. We can also look at it critically. It's just, like you said, we'd probably need to be committed if we lived in that headspace.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say this one last thing, because we live in a society that is very selective. I want to say things are convenient for people. They choose and pick and choose what they want to be mad about. And I'm not trying to sit here in this holier than thou situation, but I think about actors all the time. I was a big Game of Thrones guy, and so I don't know if you watched that or whatever, but the character of Joffrey, a deplorable human being,
the worst
in terms of characters.
Yeah.
But the actor then would get death threats for how bad, you know, his character was. And you couldn't separate that. That same actor was a little child in The Dark Knight. So it's just like, you know, like we are so, I don't know. I'll get on a soapbox, but we can be a very, very different and kind of in some ways warped society, and very selective in terms of what we get upset about. And that to me is, like I said, is like just a dichotomy, right? You know, so the art versus the artist. And then when you can't separate it, you can separate it on this side, but you can't separate it on the other side. It's like, it's just all becomes very convenient to me. And that's frustrating. But you know,
yeah, we don't see behind the scenes. We know, like, the Game of Thrones analogy is perfect, because like Tywin Lannister, his character is he's just the worst. And his little person's son is, you know, like, he just wants his father's approval, and he wants nothing to do with him, and he's an embarrassing mistake and all of these different things. And he would say this awful stuff to the actors, and then, you know, they'd yell cut, and he would be like, I'm so sorry for saying all these terrible things to you. It's like, we don't see that part. We don't see what's happening behind the curtain either. So it's really hard to know. You know, I think that's what the other beautiful part about the wrestling business is. The art form of it is, we don't know when it's real or not. We don't know if it is what they said. You know, it's those characters turned up to 11. That's why it's fun, because it's like, is this real? Because Paul Heyman's not always going to come up and get really close to the camera and go, this, my friends, is a shoot. We don't always get to see that. But when he was ripping into Vince, that sure felt like Vince going like, I need you to rip into me and just tell me everything you're thinking about. And then him just doing it. And it being part of the show. It's like, I don't know if that was scripted or not. I don't know if they have permission. Sometimes they cross the line and we have backstage fights. And sometimes they don't, because you're asking these athletes, especially during the steroid era, who have elevated testosterone and probably a lack of emotional control to go out and method act and commit to that character in the ring, out the ring, wherever, maintain kayfabe, do all of these different things. And then they say something or do something and we're surprised when it's terrible, when they're method acting a terrible person. Asking someone to shut that off can be challenging. It's hard for actors to do it.
Wow.
Like look what happened to Heath Ledger in, you referenced Batman, Dark Knight. Like he had a hard time when he would put himself in that headspace, taking him out at night. And he had a dependency on sleeping pills to try to sleep because he couldn't. And it's just, I can't imagine being in that headspace, being a character that's like, yeah, my character's a murderer or whatever deplorable person they are. And then having to maintain that when they're out to eat with their family because a fan might come up to them or, whatever. I can't even imagine trying to pull myself out of that when I'm not in full control of my emotions. It's just, man, it's so complicated.
Yeah, it's extremely deep, extremely layered. As you were talking, Brad, I know I've tried to force this down both of y'all's throats, on multiple occasions in terms of watch Heels. But, Heels is on Netflix now. And while it does represent an independent wrestling network, that dichotomy is discussed, kind of throughout, because it's a small town, or the case to be, small town. I think it's in Georgia is where they're based out of. And so, all right, are you always this character when you're in the corner store? You know what I mean? Buying apple juice, like, you know what I mean, for your kids.
Yeah.
Right. So how do you truly separate those things? So if and when you get a chance to watch that, I'd love to do a rewatch of Heels with y'all. We can discuss that series.
That sounds fun.
Sign us up. Well, you heard what we thought of the Mr. McMahon series. We would love to know your takeaways. Get at us at GIPod19. Warren, this has been a great conversation. What are the best ways to connect with and support you?
Well, support the network. So support the network, 19 Media Group, 19MG on X. Make sure you follow my great friends over here, Brad and Tyler. I can make infringement as well. If you're so inclined to rock with me, you can find me at Shaw Sports NBA or Dope_interviews. But more importantly, man, just rock with the network. So much great talent. Jessica, Carmen, Dez, I mean, Ricky, everybody, Mo. We're talent rich. We're small. We're mighty. But we're doing the damn thing. So rock with everybody, man. And I promise you won't be disappointed. Shout out to Mike Steph too.
Yes. Yes, indeed. Well said, Warren. Sign us up for Heels. This is going to be great. We'll definitely have you back. Thank you for being here. And thank you all for being here. We'll see you next time. Gimmick Infringement is a part of 19 Media Group. You can listen to us on Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you find podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube via the 19 Media Group channel. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share.